I used to think dogs ignored commands for one simple reason: they just did not want to listen. If a dog walked away during recall, ignored a sit command, or completely tuned out its owner outside, I assumed the dog was simply being stubborn or badly trained. And honestly, that explanation felt convincing for a long time. From the outside, it really can look like dogs understand perfectly and simply choose not to cooperate. But the more dogs I observed closely, the more I realized the situation was often much more complicated than that. Some dogs ignoring commands were not rebellious at all, they were distracted, overwhelmed, confused, stressed, emotionally disconnected, or mentally overloaded. That realization completely changed the way I started understanding dog behavior. I stopped asking, "Why is this dog refusing to listen?" and started asking, "What is making listening difficult for this dog right now?" That single mindset shift changed everything. Suddenly, command failure no longer looks simple at all. Most owners feel frustrated when dogs ignore commands because the behavior feels personal. It feels like the dog understands exactly what is being asked but chooses the environment, distractions, or its own interests instead. But dogs do not experience the world the same way humans do. What feels like a simple command to us may feel emotionally difficult, mentally overwhelming, or completely drowned out by environmental pressure to the dog. One thing I misunderstood early on was assuming dogs automatically generalize training perfectly everywhere. A dog that listens beautifully at home may genuinely struggle to process the same command outside. To humans, the command feels identical. To the dog, the emotional environment may feel completely different. This is one reason dogs often seem to forget training in public places. The dog may not be intentionally ignoring the owner but struggling to stay mentally connected through overwhelming stimulation. Outside environments are incredibly intense for many dogs. Humans see a normal walk while dogs process smells, movement, sounds, emotional tension, other dogs, people, traffic, animals, and environmental changes all at once. Some dogs naturally handle this stimulation better than others. Certain dogs remain calm and focused easily while others become mentally overloaded very quickly. That overload often gets mistaken for stubbornness or disobedience. The dog appears to stop listening while internally struggling to process everything calmly enough to respond properly. One of the biggest things I learned is that emotional state affects learning dramatically. A stressed, anxious, overstimulated, frustrated, or exhausted dog often struggles to process commands clearly even if it understands them normally. This is why dogs sometimes behave beautifully in one situation and completely disconnected in another. The issue is often emotional regulation rather than intentional defiance. Another thing I misunderstood was the role motivation plays in obedience. Some dogs are highly food motivated while others care more about movement, praise, toys, play, exploration, or emotional engagement. Owners sometimes assume dogs are ignoring commands intentionally when the reward simply does not compete successfully against the environment. A basic treat may feel meaningless compared to exciting smells or movement outside. That does not mean dogs should only obey for rewards. It simply means motivation heavily influences attention and engagement during learning. One major breakthrough for many owners happens when they stop taking behavior personally. Dogs are not constantly trying to disrespect humans intentionally. Many dogs ignoring commands are actually confused, distracted, emotionally overloaded, or insufficiently connected mentally during that moment. That perspective shift changes training enormously. One thing many owners accidentally do is repeat commands over and over while frustration rises emotionally. The dog hears increasing pressure but often becomes more mentally disconnected instead of clearer. Eventually the dog starts tuning out completely. Owners interpret this as stubbornness while the dog often feels confused, pressured, or overwhelmed internally. That cycle creates frustration for both sides. The owner feels ignored while the dog struggles to understand how to succeed properly. One thing that changed my perspective massively was watching calm, experienced trainers work with difficult dogs. Instead of escalating pressure emotionally, they focused heavily on timing, clarity, engagement, and reducing confusion. The results were often incredible. Dogs previously labeled impossible suddenly became much more responsive once communication improved. That taught me an important lesson about behavior overall. Many command problems are not simply obedience problems but communication problems between humans and dogs together. Dogs learn best when information feels clear and emotionally manageable. Frustration and pressure often slow learning dramatically. Another thing owners underestimate is how quickly emotional pressure affects focus. Nervous owners, chaotic environments, leash tension, repeated corrections, and stressful situations can all reduce a dog's ability to process commands clearly. Dogs are extremely sensitive to emotional energy. Many pick up on frustration from owners almost instantly. The more emotionally tense training becomes, the more mentally disconnected many dogs become during sessions. Suddenly both sides begin feeding off each other's stress. This is why calmness matters so much during training. Calm communication often creates better focus than emotional pressure and frustration ever will. Another thing I noticed repeatedly is that highly intelligent dogs are often labeled difficult or stubborn more frequently than expected. Independent thinking dogs sometimes process situations differently instead of automatically obeying immediately. That independence frustrates some owners enormously. But independence does not automatically mean the dog lacks intelligence or respect. In fact, many independent dogs are extremely observant and thoughtful. They simply engage differently than highly handler-focused breeds naturally driven to seek human approval constantly. Breed tendencies shape behavior far more than many people realize. Guardian breeds, scent hounds, northern breeds, and independent working dogs often process commands very differently from retrievers or herding dogs. Owners sometimes compare completely different breeds unfairly without realizing genetics influence focus, responsiveness, motivation, and environmental sensitivity heavily. That does not mean independent dogs cannot become beautifully trained companions. It simply means training often requires more patience, engagement, and relationship building. Relationship plays a massive role in responsiveness overall. Dogs that feel emotionally engaged with owners often stay mentally connected much longer during training. This is why trust and communication matter so much. Dogs generally learn more effectively when they feel emotionally safe and mentally involved. One thing many owners struggle with emotionally is embarrassment in public. When dogs ignore commands around other people, owners often feel judged instantly. That emotional pressure creates frustration extremely quickly. Ironically, dogs often sense this tension immediately through body language, leash pressure, tone of voice, and emotional energy. The more frustrated owners become, the harder many dogs struggle with focus. Suddenly both sides become emotionally disconnected from each other. One major mindset shift happens when owners stop viewing every failure as intentional disobedience. Instead of asking, "Why won't my dog listen?" they begin asking, "What is making listening difficult right now?" That one question changes training completely. Suddenly the goal becomes helping the dog succeed instead of constantly proving authority. Of course, structure and consistency still matter enormously. Dogs absolutely need boundaries, guidance, and communication. But consistency works best when paired with emotional understanding. Dogs generally become more cooperative when training feels clear, calm, and emotionally manageable. Another huge factor is lifestyle itself. Underexercised dogs, mentally bored dogs, overtired dogs, overstimulated dogs, or emotionally stressed dogs often struggle with focus dramatically. Some dogs ignoring commands are actually frustrated from lack of stimulation and outlet. Others are emotionally overloaded from too much chaos without enough decompression and rest. This is why sleep, routine, exercise, enrichment, emotional stability, and environment all affect behavior heavily. Training never exists separately from the dog's overall emotional life. One thing dogs constantly teach owners is patience. Progress often happens much slower than people expect, especially when emotional overload and distraction play major roles. Many owners become discouraged too quickly because they interpret slower progress as failure. In reality, some dogs simply need more repetition, clearer communication, or lower pressure environments to succeed. The best dog handlers I have watched remain remarkably calm during setbacks. They adjust environments, simplify tasks, rebuild focus, and avoid turning mistakes into emotional conflict. That calmness often changes behavior dramatically. Dogs generally learn far more effectively when frustration decreases. One thing I eventually realized is that many dogs ignoring commands are not being disrespectful at all. Many are emotionally distracted, environmentally overwhelmed, mentally disconnected, or simply struggling to process information clearly in that moment. That realization completely changed how I understand obedience. I stopped viewing command failure as personal disrespect and started viewing it as information about the dog's emotional state instead. Of course, dogs still test boundaries sometimes because they are living creatures with personalities, emotions, preferences, and changing energy levels. But many command failures are far more complicated underneath the surface. Once I understood that, training became much less frustrating and much more productive overall. I stopped fighting dogs emotionally and started focusing more on communication and understanding instead. Dogs ignoring commands are not always what most owners think they are. Many are overwhelmed, distracted, emotionally overloaded, undermotivated, or simply misunderstood by the humans trying to communicate with them. And honestly, realizing that completely changed the way I look at dog behavior altogether.